Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. I'm Joe Marcello, and it's been a while since I've been on the show. How about that? Did you forget about me? Did you miss me? Well, have no fear. I'm back with a brand new episode. And today I'm bringing you an interview with someone who is like one of us. He's a comic book fan, but he's also a wrestling fan. And he's been able to marry the two. I'm talking about none other than Michael Kingston. He created his own independent comic book called Headlocked Comics. It's tales from the road of the world of wrestling, written by wrestlers for wrestling fans. It's a great series. We're talking about wrestlers like X-Pac, Danhausen, Jerry Lawler, just to name a few. They've all contributed to stories, and they're all found on headlockedcomics.com. So enough of me talking. Let's get to the interview. Let's introduce and say hello to Mike Kingston. How are you, sir?
How we doing? Doing good.
So again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. You have an interest that is closely aligned with mine. You're a comic book fan as well as a wrestling fan. And that's just dope. So we asked the same question to everyone to kick it off, and that is, how did you first discover comic books?
Um, I don't know exactly when I got it, but the first comic book I have is it's up here. What is it? Amazing Spider-Man 187. I have it like up on my wall. It's Captain America and Spider-Man fighting on the front, and little shadow of Electro in the background. But at some point I'm familiar with all the characters from, just toys and games and stuff, and you kind of know who everybody was. And they had those old cartoons, Captain
Right.
America throws his mighty shield and all that. So I was familiar with all the people, and then I just remember seeing Spider-Man and Captain America fighting on the cover of this magazine at the grocery store, and I was like, I had to have it. And I got that, and yeah, I gotten a couple others here and there, and then my mom took me to a proper comic store, and the sky opened up, and the birds were singing and all of that, and I started just buying comics, tons of them, and I've been reading them. There was a brief stint in college where I didn't have access to a store, and I didn't collect. But then when I kept out of college, I tried to resume my collection, realizing that my collection of Uncanny X-Men stopped at 210. And 212 is the Wolverine Sabretooth one that's super expensive,
Right.
whatnot. So but yeah, so just it's for a long time I've always been drawn to the characters and whatnot.
Did you have a particular character or artist that you were more fond of kind of growing up?
I'd say the thing that got me like deep into comics was the Claremont X-Men run. That was the thing that really got me going. I mean, obviously, like I said, I had at least a passing familiarity with everything,
Mhm.
but that was the thing that really kind of hooked me from week to week. And I always like Spider-Man. I've always been more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy. Just I always liked, I don't know, the Marvel characters always had like they were always more relatable, right?
Mhm.
Like even Thor's a god, but somewhat more relatable. And the DC characters always felt less relatable to me, I guess. I don't know. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. So that being said, when did you discover and how did you discover wrestling?
so my whole life has always been a fight against sleep. I have fought sleep my entire life. I've worked nights for, I don't know, most of my life. I sleep maybe between 4 and 5 hours a day. One night I was up late flipping channels, and the first Saturday night's main event came on, and it was towards the end, and it was Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, and Georgie Animal Steel against Mike Rotunda, Barry Windham, and Ricky Steamboat. And Georgie Animal Steel doing a shtick blew my mind. There's this dude, he's got hair all over his body, and, his big bat roll on his neck and his green tongue, and whatever. And I don't know. I mean, outside of the green tongue, I guess it ended up being sort of a look into my future, I guess. But it was like, but I just never seen anything like it, and
Mhm.
I've watched wrestling probably every day in some form since.
At what point did you decide, hey, I want to marry these two interests of mine and make it a thing? Let's make it a career.
Um, so liking both of them, I would buy wrestling comics whenever they came out, and to me, they always sucked. It's just not what I wanted. Like, I think anybody that consumes uh some any form of entertainment, like, you can sort of tell when something's made out of love and something's made for money. And I just always felt like the people that made wrestling comics didn't understand wrestling. They didn't care about wrestling. Um, no, whatever. There's none of them ever connected to me. I mean, the stuff that I was reading, uh, later on, I found there were other wrestling comics, whatever, like Whoa Nelly or whatever, that were amazing. But the stuff I was looking at, like, licensed books, whatever, just to me, they were always very bad. And so I just, everybody I knew liked wrestling, liked comics. So I was like, this seems like a slam dunk, right? So I write up a script, I have an idea, and I build a pitch plan and a marketing plan. So I have a biochemistry degree. I'm out of college. I'm like, oh, this is something that, I think would be cool. And I took it to everybody in comics, and everybody summarily shut me down. Uh, Dude from a fairly prominent publisher laughed right in my face. Um, and it was just wrestling. I mean, there's a store in my town that wouldn't, when I made the book, wouldn't carry it on consignment. He's like, oh, no one's ever going to read this. I mean, I mean, when do you ever hear about shit like that? It was insane. But yeah, I mean, I got pretty much, I got slapped down by just about everybody. Um, and so I just decided to make it myself. Um, and I started selling it on my backpack at wrestling shows, and it just built it, one person at a time, one reader at a time. And then, cool thing that happened for me was that a lot of wrestlers would be at Comic Cons as fans, and they bought my books from me, and then they liked them. And then from there, that led to those guys supporting me and helping me get sort of noticed more. And then we started actually making comics together, and it's I mean, it's exceeded my wildest expectations. All I ever want to do is make a cool wrestling comic, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, it's it's taken is more than a decade of my life to be where I'm at. So
That's pretty. I commend your perseverance. In the face of the adversity that you came across, because not many people would do that themselves. They would just say, well, I tried, I gave it a valiant attempt, and everyone just shut me down. But the fact you're able to kind of take it and run with it on your own is absolutely fantastic.
it's one of those things where sometimes the universe gives you what you need, but you're not aware of it at the time. So, like, if somebody had picked the book up, say, whatever, in 2009, 10, it would have been in stores and it would have been out of stores. And that's it. And then I would have been done. Like, I would have been one of those guys that had one book on the shelves and never had another book again. And it forced me to build something more sustainable and to build something stronger. And like, I don't sell my books in comic book stores, right? Like, I would say I have a fairly unique path in the world. I don't know if there's anybody that's done it like I've done it or whatever, but like, I, but it was because of that I had to do it that way. And then, and then, after shooting me down, like, Image published Ringside, which wasn't like Headlocked, but when you read the previews copy, it sounded exactly like Headlocked. And I got mad or whatever, and then I was like, well, shit, I'm going to talk to some of my wrestling friends about making books. You know what I mean? So, like, sometimes, like, that adversity, right? Like, obviously you can shut it down, but it's in my experience anyway, it's just always gotten me to pivot to a different direction, and pushed me in ways that I might not have gone, and has ultimately made everything stronger and more fulfilling.
Who are some of the wrestlers? I read that you had like Thunder Rosa and Lita and oh crud, can't remember the names of all of them off the top of my head. But they actually contributed or help you with your comics.
Yeah, so Jerry Lawler does the cover art to my trades. And that was one of the first big guys that I got. But I mean, I've done a story with Cody Rhodes. I did a story with Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Young Bucks, Mustafa Ali, Ric Flair, Mick Foley, Trish Stratus was our newest one. I'm working on one with Claudio right now. Pentagon.
Wow, very cool.
Um, I mean, just the last book, our newest book that just came out 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe, Tales from the Road Volume 3, and it's Adam Cole, Jay White, Hobbs, Naomi, Lita, the Iconics, Fandango, and Andrade. I mean, that's a pretty stout lineup of talent. And all the stories are, they're all fictional, but they're all fun and in their own different ways. Like the Iconics they had done a podcast about having dysmorphia from being in WWE, and we did a story about that, but like filtered through A Nightmare on Elm Street. And just like, so some of them are powerful, some of them are personal, some of them are fun, some of them are just a story with Gangrel about a guy that trains Bigfoot to wrestle, which we're actually turning into a long form series, and that's going to be our next project. But it's it's fun to jam with people that you respect creatively, and it's the best thing in the world when somebody that you respect as a creator respects what you do. Like, that's the real payoff for me. Like the hours of no sleep, the schedule that I keep, and I still work full time. I work 7 days a week. I manage a fleet of truck drivers, and then I'm on the road 25 weekends a year, and I publish multiple titles out of my bedroom. So
wow.
it's a very busy existence, and I don't sleep a lot, and I push myself really hard. But like I said, man, it's exceeded my wildest expectations at the end of the day.
Does your truck driving business, does that coincide or have any connection with wrestling?
No, no,
No.
no. I manage a fleet of truck drivers for Target.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I'm technically on the clock right now.
Oh,
But
okay. All right.
I work overnights, so like when I do my conventions, I do my stuff, and then I go back to my hotel and I dispatch my drivers and I do my payroll and everything, and work on scripts and whatnot. So I average about, I'd say, between 4 and 5 hours of sleep a day. Sometimes less. Conventions can be tough. Like if I'm doing San Diego, New York, whatever, like a 4 day. I just did Emerald City, and that's a 4 full day show across the country, right? So,
Wow.
and I just did 4 weeks in a row. I did Stockton, and then because I had to fulfill my Kickstarter for Volume 3 of Tales from the Road, so they came the day before I left for Stockton Con. So I packed up stuff and I flew to Stockton. I came home for 36 hours, packed up more stuff, flew back to Seattle. I live in New York, and then I went to Lexington and back, and what was the last one? Richmond. And then my flight got canceled on the way home from Richmond, and I had to drive home 8 hours. And then I've had this week off, and then I go to Mania next week, and then I'm a guest at Starcast Australia. So I leave from Mania directly to Starcast, and then I do Maine and Chicago. So it's like 8 out of 9 weeks on the road while I'm fulfilling a Kickstarter and doing all this other stuff.
Whereabouts in New York do you live?
Upstate New York. I live about 20 minutes north of Syracuse.
Okay.
Or Albany, right. I'm sorry, not Syracuse. I was born in Syracuse.
I have to ask because when people say upstate, some people get real pissy about that. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're in Westchester, right? That's upstate." No,
dude. No. And I mean, even people, even in Syracuse, right? You say upstate, but like people in Plattsburgh are going to take offense to that. So New York's a big state, and upstate
Yeah.
carries a lot of weight for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, working on your own comic and you're working with, big name talent, do you run into licensing issues by any chance?
No, so we don't use likenesses. We don't use real names. Everything's fictional. So like Ric Flair, I just started with Ric Flair, and we used Platinum Prescott. It's a story by them. It's not a story about them.
Got it.
And then that way people don't worry about what we're trying to say, or, oh, they're using this guy, but they really, that's really taking a shot at Triple H or some nonsense. Like,
Hmm.
we're just telling stories, and I don't want people to read too far into it. And I think, we did a story with Adam Cole, and we actually did a video game story. So we used his sort of Chugs persona that he uses on Twitch. You know, so sometimes, the characters bear a passing resemblance, but they're not that person. So, because it gets tricky too, right? Like, if you're trying to tell a story, I don't want people to worry about how tough they look in a story or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Oh, I gotta protect my character. You just want the story to be the story, right? Like, you got 12. We do short stories, so usually 6 to 12 pages, sometimes longer if it's the story warrants it. But like, you gotta kind of get in and get out, and you can't worry about people's feelings and stuff. So, it serves the story better to make the people fictional.
And doing some research on you, I read that you actually worked for Boom Studios for a time.
Yeah, they had a WWE licensed comic, and I co-wrote a story with AJ Styles for the Royal Rumble special, and I co-wrote a story with Samoa Joe for the Raw 25th anniversary, and I wrote a story about Bret and Jimmy Hart and their relationship. And that was fun. I mean, it was more of an issue of, like, because I don't exist in comics, right? Like, I had made a pitch to write those books because I have a whole separate network outside of the direct market. But, they went with a guy that had a more established name, and that's fine. And he did a really good job with them. So, I was talking to Joe and AJ about it. I was like, oh, we should just do something. So I actually pitched it to Boom, like, hey, I can get, AJ Styles and Samoa Joe to write stories with me. And they're like, okay. So I did it. Like, we were trying, the stories I wrote were trying to plug holes in WWE's booking. So, like, we did a story with AJ Styles that was from the time he enters the building till the time he debuts at the Royal Rumble. And, like, there were a lot of things in his sort of feud with John Cena that didn't make sense. So we did this sort of thing where AJ shows up, and then John Cena he was hurt at the time, so he wasn't in that Rumble, but he sort of shows up to sort of give AJ, like, I'm the boss around here kind of thing. And then AJ calls Gallows and Anderson. He's like, yo, I need you guys here. And they're like, all right, just play nice till we get here. And as far as I always viewed it as sort of like almost like the De Niro Pacino conversation in Heat, right? Where they're just sitting there, like, and it ends up, like, if you look at it in that lens, a lot of the stuff that happens later, it sort of gives it a little connective tissue and makes it actually make sense. And then
That's a really interesting way of doing so.
And then the story we did with Joe was why, like, when they did the brand split, they never drafted Joe and Nakamura, because they were feuding for the title, but they never stipulated that. So it didn't make any sense why you would draft, like, somebody, why you wouldn't draft Joe Nakamura. So we made a story up about why Joe wasn't drafted, where basically he calls up Mick Foley and threatens that he'll destroy the entire roster if, he doesn't get to finish his feud with Nakamura on his terms and whatever. And the Bret Hart story was one I was super proud of, just because Jimmy Hart came to me and told me how much he liked it. I was writing in his voice a lot of it, but it was Bret in the locker room before his first match in WWE with Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy gives him the glasses and whatever, and he's laying out his plan for him. And then as he's laying it out, we do sort of a little retrospective of Bret's career. And then, when we get to the end of it, Bret's looking in the mirror, and now he's in the locker room before he goes out to fight Flair. And Jimmy Hart and him at that time aren't together, but Jimmy shows up. He's like, it all worked like I told you, huh? And he's like, yeah, I guess it did, whatever. And then he goes out to fight Flair. So that was fun. The licensing was tricky, and that's where licensing is a hindrance, because I wrote this whole story, and my first word is, my first sentence is WWE's the land of the giants, and it's Andre throwing him out of WrestleMania 2. And they're like, oh, you can't use Andre the Giant. I'm like, what the hell? And they're like, you can't. And like, they gave me this whole list of people that I couldn't use. So like, I used John Studd in that spot, even though, you know what I mean? It didn't make as much
Right.
sense. And I had to use Shawn Michaels as a rocker and as Shawn Michaels, and Davey Boy Smith as a British Bulldog and as a singles guy, just because there were so many people that made sense for the stories that they didn't have the rights to use.
Got
But
it.
I don't know. To me, it's fun. It's like it's like trying to put pieces into place, you know?
Yeah. Did you find working with the Boom Studios to be, with the exception of the licensing that you mentioned, did you find that to be an enjoyable experience?
I mean, I had no problems. I mean, I got I got minimal notes. I got one note in the AJ thing because I had Gallows and Anderson in a bar, and they're like, "Oh, could you not have them in a bar?" And I'm like, "Sure, put them in the gym." And that was, I mean, it was easy. Nobody touched any of my dialogue. Um, Everything was kind of as was. So, and then the Joe and the Brett stories we did with Mikel Molopolo, who does my art for Headlocked, who is a Samoan wrestler from New Zealand. He did, we did Joe and the Bret Hart story together. So obviously I had a relationship with him, and it was easy for us to work together. So it wasn't it was pretty smooth, all things together. When it comes to comics, I generally have to make all my own breaks, and I know that, and that's fine. You know what I mean? There's a long time that frustrated me, but I don't care anymore because I've done so much cool shit.
Were there any, focusing on the comic part of it, were there artists or writers that kind of inspired you along the way that you wanted? I don't want to say emulated, but that really, I guess, inspired you in your work.
Yeah, I mean the big one for me, like I mean, I love all kinds of stuff. But the book that made me decide that I wanted to write comics was Concrete, Think Like a Mountain. Like, I think Paul Chadwick is amazing. Um and it's funny because I've met him a handful of times, and I generally don't get super starstruck, but like I super marked out for meeting Paul Chadwick, and I don't think he could quite in his head grasp how, you know, his book led to a wrestling comic. But I mean, it's not necessarily, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the story or whatever. It's just the craftsmanship or whatever. Um but I mean, I love that. There's a ton of people that I would love to collaborate with, like Eduardo Rizzo is, a god. 100 Bullets is like one of my favorite things
Oh man,
in
yes.
comics. I would love to do that. It's just a matter of, Ed McGuinness has done a couple things for me for, some pinups and stuff for me because he's a big fan of my books. And I mean, I adore Ed as a human and as an artist. So, it's tricky sometimes to get to play around with big names. Like, even if you can afford them and they want to do it, sometimes it's an availability issue. So, everybody's so busy.
Did you or will you? I don't know. I noticed on your website, um, uh, we've interviewed her, and I forgot her name because I'm really bad with names. Um, she worked. She did a lot of design work for WWE and designed CM Punk's.
Oh,
Uh,
Jill Thompson.
yes, thank you. Good lord. Someday I'm gonna start being good with names. Have you done any collaboration with her, because she's a big wrestling fan?
Yeah. I love Jill to death. So we did a story with Mick Foley together that she illustrated. We did a Christmas story that Mick and I wrote together. And I mean, Mick wrote it, and then I sort of broke it down into panels and sort of, I mean, he wrote, we had 6 pages and he wrote me like a 16-page story.
Oh
That's the hard part about dealing with wrestlers is, if you give them too much freedom, they don't necessarily understand real estate in comics and
right.
what that, we ended up adapting it to 9 and making it work. But Jill did the art for that. I did a Christmas story with Nick Gage, and Jill did the cover for that. It's sort of making a Santa hat with a candy cane wrapped in broken Christmas lights. Um, and then she does the first book I did was Headlocked, which is a sort of an HBO style drama about a theater major who drops out of college to chase his dream of becoming a wrestler. And Jill did all my chapter breaks.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've done a lot with Jill. She's the best. Such a good person and such an incredible artist.
Yeah, very much so.
So it's funny too, because everybody likes different things, right? And then everybody knows her from Sandman and all the stuff that she's done. But she did this mini series called Finals with Will Pfeiffer that I loved, and it's just always funny. Like different people come at you for different things, right? Like some people want to meet Chris Evans because he's Captain America, and some people are like, oh, Lucas Lee's the best, right? So, like, I'm that guy to Jill, right? I'm like, oh man, Finals was like the greatest. And she's like, oh, that's your, not, Beast of Burden or Sandman or Wonder Woman or any of the things that she's done.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I think, when we were talking to her, we have these interviews and conversations where people were coming at them in a certain angle, like, more comic oriented. And through the conversation, it comes up, well, I did all this work for WWE and I designed this. And I'm like, wait, hold up. Hey, let's shut up with the comics for a second. So let's talk wrestling. And I was just like in awe about, her love for it. And I mean, she was making references to like, Deep South wrestling and, NWA and, I was like, what? That's awesome.
She's got real cred.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've worked with a lot of wrestlers and you're a wrestling fan. What was this like, the whole creative process for you? I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of, obviously writers in the business, and there's particular ways of constructing a story and methodology behind it. And there is a creative process. DC has theirs, Marvel apparently has theirs, and everyone loses their shit when they jump from one company to the other about how to do it. What was the creative process like for you, and did you find it difficult in any way?
So I think the coolest thing for me, right? I'm 100% self-taught, right? I taught myself how to do all of this stuff. I mean, obviously when I say taught myself, obviously I talked to people who were, experienced for help, but I mean, I didn't have any formal training. I just started doing it. And the thing is, right, like I'm nobody's priority in anything, right? Like I'm not making anybody rich in comics and I'm not making anybody rich in wrestling. Everybody's got their sources of income and whatever. And I work with people that are well above my level, right? For a guy that makes indie comics, right? So I had, if I want things to happen, I have to be super adaptable. Like I have to be, but not having any rules from the beginning, I didn't have anything to worry about breaking. So I just try to tell stories. So what I do, it's different. I mean, the process with the wrestlers is different for everybody, right? Some people I'll sit down with and we'll just sort of wrap out a concept and the story, and then I'll write it and they'll give me notes. And that's how it works a lot of times. But different people want to do different things. Like Frankie Kazarian wrote his whole story. Mick Foley wrote a long form thing. Shag Gaspard wrote a long thing. So it's different with everybody. But it's always fun to just sit down and just jam with people and stuff. That first sort of brainstorm time is like the best part of it, where you're just kicking around ideas and then, you come up with ridiculous stuff that would never work, but it's super fun to talk about, whatever. It's just, and then, and I never try to lose, that I think, sometimes people look at fan derisively, right? But I never want to stop being a fan of things I love. And I see it in wrestling. I see wrestlers that are so jaded by the business. You know what I mean? They forget about, what made them a fan. And there's people that never lose that, right? Hurricane is a perfect example. He's a really good friend of mine now from this, from making comics. And he was my favorite wrestler because he was the comic book guy, right? Like he was the superhero. And I'm gonna see him tomorrow at SmackDown. But like he's uh you know, he's a fan of everything still. Like, and we'll have, we can have like sort of conversations about booking and whatever, but like most of the conversations we have are about how awesome shit is, right? But like, oh, check this out. Like he's a huge Star Wars fan or whatever, so it's just cool when people don't lose that light, right? And I've always tried not to, I always try to be conscious of it. So there's times, where you got to be present, but then there's times I try to step back and just be like, yo, man, I'm sitting at a bar with Ric Flair talking about a comic book story for my comic book, right? Like one of the most famous guys in the history of in everything, right? Like not even just wrestling, but just everything.
Yeah.
And, so that's, I always try to, and that makes a lot of the sacrifices and the pain and whatever that I go through to do all this. It makes it all worth it, because at the end of the day, right? Like if I'm going to kill myself to make comics, like I want to make the stuff I want to make, and I want to make it with the people I want to make it for and make it with, and, whatever. But you try to remember like, yo, man, this is so cool.
That's awesome. What are your thoughts on the state of the comic book industry for independent creators nowadays?
I mean, I think at least on some level, people are more open to it than they've ever been, which is cool. And I just think it's funny on some level, because I feel like people are making like just incredible, incredible books. But it's also, on some level, comics have never been more minimized as a medium, I think. Like, but also not. Like it's weird. Like it's such a weird thing, right? Because you're selling, I mean, Raina Telgemeier is selling all these books, and Scholastic selling all these books, and young adult stuff is flying off the shelves and whatever. And it's interesting. Like, but then on some level, other things feel like they've been so minimized, and I don't know. None of it makes sense. I mean, the industry's always been weird, and it's never made sense to me. Like my first experience walking around, I had a script that I wrote and a business plan. And I knew where wrestling fans were because I was a wrestling fan. I knew where to go to sell it to them or whatever. But people were so focused on the direct market for so long, and it's all they cared about. Right. Like, I mean, like if you're, not to relitigate a previous issue, but if you're Boom Studios and you've got a guy that's selling wrestling comics all over the country, it's a whole different bunch of people. People are just worried about that diamond number. And I think it pigeonholed them to a degree that, I don't know if any of them ever recovered from. And that's unfortunate to some degree, like, because people are making incredible stuff right now, but wrestling and comics suffer from the same sort of things. Like they're both incredible mediums, but people have such a limited understanding of them. And also to a certain extent, not a lot of respect for the creative process, right? Like you're like, oh, it's just comic books, right? Like it's just wrestling. It's all fake, right? Even the people who love it, right? Like, I mean, you've seen these people that, everybody's seen those like, videos of guys that are, I'm going to be a wrestler. And you're like, if you respected wrestling, you wouldn't try to be a wrestler looking like that or, whatever. Right. But everybody thinks that they can do it. And I know that coming from me, that's crazy because I did that. I thought I could do it, and everybody told me no when I did it. Anyway. But, and then from, a lot of people think that they're wrestling fans, but they're just WWE fans. And there's a lot of people who think they're comic book fans, but they're really just superhero fans. Mm-hmm. And if you take the superhero fans out of comic book fans, it's a much smaller pie, but everybody's making such great stuff. And I wish that there was a way that you could get in front of people and be like, we're making today's story or tomorrow's stories now. I understand, like, they're not, how many people have come to me and be like, oh, if Headlock was a movie, I would totally watch it. And I'm like, all right, well, you can still experience that story in paper form. You're like, oh yeah, I don't read comics. And that's another weird one. I don't read comics. Like, I don't understand that. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you're interested in a story, who cares how you consume it, right? Like, yeah. I don't know. Like, I got an HD TV in my house, but like if I get, if I get super into something, I'll just watch it on my phone. Like I don't care. Like I want that story. Like I want to experience that. I don't care how it's told to me, right? As long as it's told to me in an interesting way.
I had a very similar
Um,
conversation with my wife.
but like, I met the showrunner for Lucha Underground at
Okay.
C2E2 one year. And I was telling him about my stuff. And he's like, "Oh, it sounds very cool." He goes, "But I don't read comics." And I'm like, "You did that to me?" I'm like, "How many times have you had to say to somebody, 'Oh, well, this isn't like wrestling?'" And he's like, "Oh shit." He goes, "I did." Right? Like he's like, "I have the same conversation in my thing, but then I just turned around and did it myself."
His
So
show was like the live action comic. I mean,
sure.
it was bananas. I mean, it was
Absolutely.
beyond professional wrestling. Like there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief when you're watching a regular live professional wrestling. His wasn't live. It was recorded, so they had a little bit more wiggle room to really produce the hell out of it.
I mean, they
And
they really, I mean, the end of that first season with Vampiro and Pentagon or whatever, like I lost my mind. And I mean, I just think for me, as a, if I've been watching wrestling X amount of years, and if you can get me, like you can really hook me on something, like I feel like you've done something because I feel like I've
Mhm.
seen almost everything. I've seen it. I'm gonna watch old stuff, new stuff, whatever. I watch indies, WWE, I watch it all. But like, if you can get me with something, I feel like you've done something. And man, that the Vampiro and being the master or whatever I was all on board. Like it was incredible. And it's tough though too, because I mean, everybody goes through the same process. They had so many of their talents stripped from them, and then it's hard, right? Like it's hard to rebuild with, you take guys that have names, but like, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful to anybody because I think that everybody's got skills, right? But at the time, right, trying to build around like uh, you know, Jack Swagger, great wrestler, but he's not for to me, he's not for Lucha Underground, right? Like
Mhm.
he's not that comic book guy. He's a, team angle, whatever, you have your matches, like he's that guy, and he's not necessarily, but at the time, right, they had taken so many people and he had star power. So but you're putting somebody in a position where they don't necessarily aren't going to succeed the best. And that's tough. You know what I mean? Like that's it's unfortunate because I love that show so much. It was really good, but even by the last season, I mean, even I was kind of like, so, you know, it's
Fair enough.
it is what it is, but you're sort of, it's the landscape too, I
Right.
have to react to everything. Like when the landscape, I ran a Kickstarter for volume 3 for Tales from the Road, and I ran it for 21 days, and it was like the 21 most newsworthy days in the history of wrestling. Like Punk got fired, the merger went through, Edge jumped to AEW, Jay jumped to WWE, Rock made a surprise appearance. Um, they fired Ziggler and Ali and a bunch of guys, like just trying to get bandwidth for me. You know what I mean? Like I'm just a little boat on the big landscape, right? And so, and everybody sort of has to deal with that. So
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to ask. I think I kind of know what your answer's going to be, but your thoughts on the state of wrestling nowadays.
I think it's great. I I've always been a story guy more than, like, this is gonna sound like sacrilege to a lot of people, but like I'm not the biggest New Japan fan, right? Like there was a period of time when that style wasn't available anywhere else, and it was interesting to me. But now that sort of mainstream style has been co-opted by the American companies. I mean, AEW is essentially Ring of Honor, like with a production budget.
Hmm.
And so like now to me the style, if I can get the style in America, I'm just gonna watch it there, I guess. I mean, but I've always been a story first guy, and the match enhances it. And some people are some people like I just don't want to watch 1,000 guys with black boots and trunks dropping each other on their heads and striking I mean, there's got to be a reason. Um, so like I love right now, like to me WWE's hitting on all cylinders. Um, and it's great. I think AEW has an incredible roster. They've got, I mean, always been the biggest Samoa Joe fan ever. He's a friend, and we collaborated on a Headlock story and a WWE story. Christian was a friend. Like, so I mean, there are people that are doing great things there. I just think, to me, the problem I think I have sometimes is they just need to let their stories breathe a little bit more. And I think just, sometimes whenever they do the sort of the heel beat down in the ring, like, it just always goes on a little bit too long, to where you're like, oh, your whole locker room is just letting this guy get killed out here.
Right.
Like, but I mean, for the most part, I mean, I don't think anybody can complain. There's a little of everything, for what your poison is. And obviously lucha still exists in Mexico. If that's your thing, the indies are still thriving. I mean, they always will on some level. I mean, they're not, I mean, actually, nice. I say that they're not, but I mean, the indies have really rebounded strong lately. I mean, the crowds have been hot, and there's a lot of good, character guys on the indies doing stuff. And people, I think, have started to realize that, at least to some degree, but I don't think you can go wrong, really.
Yeah. No, it's, just curious. I was listening to it was Busted Open, and Tommy Dreamer was talking about how, I guess there was some uncertainty of what was happening with TNA or something at the time, and
there still is.
Yeah. And obviously he doesn't want anything happening to the company. I don't think anyone really does. I mean, I don't watch TNA all the time, but I do check it out when I can. And I'm just glad, like he said, like, it, for that company to close, it would hurt everyone, not just people within TNA and other companies as well, because there's less places for people to go to explore, to wrestle. And it makes it a really good point, because a lot of people have like this old school mentality of like WWF, WCW, and they were competing, whereas it wasn't really the wrestlers competing with the company, one company to another. It was the management making it so.
And you get it in comics too. I mean, I think, unfortunately, the people that make the decisions a lot of times aren't necessarily thinking of it from a creative standpoint. They think of it from a business standpoint.
Right.
Most of the people that have ascended to the top of corporate America get there because they're risk averse, and not, everybody loves the guy that takes the risk, but I mean, what's the conversion rate on the risk, right? So, and that's what makes it hard. I mean, it's funny. The story I'm doing with Claudio for Tales from the Road is very much about what an artist gives up in exchange for a bigger platform. Because you need the platform, right? Like, I operate at a certain level, but I will tell you, I mean, and I will say, I make comics that are well beyond what I actually sell, because I don't have a platform per se. And that's fine. That's my choice, and I've chosen to do it that way, and whatever. But like, you have to make sacrifices for a platform. And most of the people that I know that work in comics that have a platform are very frustrated creatively. You know what I mean? Unless you're a, tippy top guy that can do what he wants. I mean, a lot of that stuff is very editorially driven. And WWE was like that for years under Vince, right? Like and it was frustrating for a lot of people creatively then. So it's hard, right? Because at the same time, creators always kind of you need to have somebody to prevent you from your worst instincts, right?
Right. Like,
Cody in AEW is very different than Cody in WWE. And there was, because there was nobody to tell Cody no. In AEW and WWE, there are people that are like, hey, let's rein this back a little bit. And it's not too much. He was too much in AEW, and people turn on for it, right? He could never be what he is in AEW because of that structure. But that, to me, is the fascinating sort of creative thing. Like, when do you put the brakes on? And, you've got to temper a creator from his, because every creator, if you just let them do what they want, they do crazy shit, So you got to find that balance between marketability, but not stifle creativity either. So
still think that is probably the most, whether or not this story gets, comes to completion or not, his story in general is pretty amazing. He's
Yeah.
like, all right, I'm going to leave where I am, huge wrestling company. I'm going to go over here and do some stuff, but then I'm going to go create competition for them. I'm going to establish that, but I'm going to go back to that. I'm like, how the hell is that possible? You know? And he's just killing it.
No, he certainly is. He certainly is. But again, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where he's right now he's in the best position to succeed, right? Because he's
Yeah.
got the freedom to do what he wants, but he's got a, you know, he's got a leash for that last 10% or whatever. If you ever ask any wrestler, right, to pitch a story, it always ends with, and then I win the title and go on a long run. You know what I mean? Because they all want to win. They, I mean, you know, even though it's whatever, it's scripted, whatever. Everybody wants to be the hero. Everybody wants to be, you know, that guy. And you know, everybody can't be that person, right? So you got to be able to make it interesting if you're not that guy. But you know, so you've got to temper people because not everybody's the guy, and that's just something that people have to, and that's a hard thing to tell somebody.
Yeah.
You know, you're you know, and you see it in acting where like, you know, you get these great character actors and these guys that are role players or whatever, but for whatever reason, you just have people in wrestling that don't necessarily want to do that. Like, I mean, Mick knew where he was. Mick Foley knew his role for a long time. And then because of that, he became such a big star. He did become the guy, right? Like, but that's it, you know, but he didn't fight City Hall. You know what I mean? He was the guy, you know, he was the role player. He was the guy who was making people and whatever. And in doing that, he made himself such a star, right? But it's so hard sometimes for people to, you know, and I get that all the time when wrestlers come up to me, and people come up to me all the time. I want to make comics and stuff. And it's all, you know, and sometimes it's just it's a wank fest or whatever. And that's not what I want to do. You know, I want to tell fun stories. I want to tell cool stories or whatever, but like, I don't want to, you know, I'm not here to, you know, jerk somebody off. So, but that's the trick.
So I want to, before we go, I have to ask you. So since we're discussing comics and wrestling, around 99, 2000, WWF at the time during the Attitude Era released a bunch of comics. The Undertaker one, probably the most successful because it just made sense. Then there was also, I think, Mankind, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and there was a Kevin Nash one.
Oh yeah, but that was a different. Yeah, that was an Extreme Studios one.
Well, okay. So, what were your thoughts on those as a comic book fan, wrestling fan, comic book creator?
I mean, those were those books are the books that, I mean, some of the books that made me want to make Headlocked because I was like, these are awful. I mean, that's what it is though, right? Like, you're like, oh, it's Kevin Nash as Mad Max and he's the toughest guy and he's banging all the girls or whatever. And it's ridiculous, right? So I'm actually working on a collaboration with a Mexican wrestler right now. We're doing a non-wrestling story. It should be coming out in July. I should be able to make some announcements soon about it, but it's coming out through a publisher actually. And we're doing it's different, you know what I mean? But it's not, I don't know. There's a line, right? And those books were very, very much over the line. And it's hard, right? Because if you're working with WWE or you're working with somebody, they want all their guys to be shown in the best light, or, you know, sometimes if you're a fan, you can't put that aside. Like if you're a super fan and, you know, of course Kevin Nash can be banging all the chicks and whatever. And like, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's tricky sometimes. It's tricky because you have so many different factors at play. You know, you obviously want to appeal to the guy's fan base, and you know, if you're a fan of something, that's going to do something. Or if that person has involvement and they want to look tough, and I mean, 99% of the edits I ever have to make, if I, you know, after I talk about a concept with wrestlers, if we have to, you know, not say 80% of the notes I get are vanity notes, where I'm like, this doesn't make sense for the story. Like, this makes you look good, but that doesn't make sense for the story because this is what the story is. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But there's always that tendency to, you know, push. So, and this is even because it's not them, right? And it's still that way. So, it's hard, I guess. You know, I guess if somebody ever made a Mike Kingston comic, I'd probably want him to bang all the girls too. You know, and be, you know, I'd certainly want some abs. I mean, because I ain't getting them in this life.
I want some hair, damn it. It's been a long time, you know, Jesus. Yeah, I remember those being I mean, I found the Undertaker being the most entertaining, at least, because his character really lent itself well to
Sure.
those stories. Um,
I mean, the
but yeah, for
pinnacle
the
though is
life of me, I was like,
The Ultimate Warrior chaining up naked Santa Claus.
oh,
I
good
mean,
lord,
that's the to
yeah.
me the pinnacle of bad wrestling comics. And so, the fun fact, I actually had gotten the Ultimate Warrior to agree to paint a cover for me before he died.
Oh
I've had
wow.
a bunch of stuff, unfortunate things. I had a Roddy Piper had agreed to do a story with me, and we were going to work on it at a show in Stockton, a convention in Stockton, and he died 6 days before the convention. But I had a long phone conversation with the Ultimate Warrior. He called me on my birthday. I mean, he didn't know it was my birthday, but he happened to call me on my birthday
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
told me to stay positive about my project. I felt like I was 9 years old. And he had painted. He had an art website, and he painted with a palette knife, which I thought was fantastic.
Oh really?
And he was painting like you know pictures of Buffalo and Ronald Reagan and whatever. I don't know. But he was super super talented, like way more talented than you would think. And so he was always having Jerry on the covers makes everybody else nervous as a wrestler who does art. Like I haven't been able to get Bret Hart for years, I think, because I think he doesn't necessarily think, even though he's a cartoonist versus Jerry's an artist, but so everybody's always nervous about Jerry 'cause Jerry's unparalleled, right? But I think I had finally convinced them, to do it, and he was into it, and we were going to do it, and then obviously things went south there. So
Wow.
it's there's a whole weird saga of things. The story I did with Crime Time was the last thing that Shad did before he died. Like he literally sent me the edits for that story 2 days before he passed,
Oh Jesus.
or 3 days before he passed. And he was a really good friend of mine. He's just a great, great human. But yeah, there's a whole like little weird documentary probably about me making my dumb wrestling comics out of my bedroom. Like
Well, I was
just
going to say, I mean, you've had some amazing interactions and, collaborations with wrestlers. And just what you just mentioned, I mean, if you compile these stories together and like your memoir of, your experience, it's just the interactions with these wrestlers prior to their passing. It just, I mean, it tugs at your heartstrings.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the whole thing's been crazy, right? Like, I mean, I sent Jerry Lawler a cold email through his website. Like, I forgot I did it after I did it, and then he agreed to do covers for me. Like, I mean, I got an email back. I assume it's a webmaster, but it's him. And then he called me. And for people who don't know about Jerry's history, but Jerry got into wrestling because he drew wrestlers and sent them into the Memphis television station as a fan, and they put him on the air, and then they hired him to draw like scenes from house shows and stuff that were non-televised that they would put on the air to sort of be like, oh, over the weekend so and so this happened, and they would use his pictures. And then from there he met artists or wrestlers, and that's how he got trained to become a wrestler. So when he saw my email, he was like, Lance Russell took a chance on me all these years ago, and he's like, so he saw an opportunity to pay that forward to me, which changed my whole life. I mean, that was a real sort of hard turn where I'm just an indie guy making books that maybe a couple wrestlers like to Jerry the King Lawler's paint covers to my books. And
Oh,
we did
Jim,
shows.
he was also a huge comic book fan too.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and that was the thing. Like, so we've done probably 40 conventions together. And sometimes the hardest thing is just keeping him at the booth, because he's out looking at stuff, and the biggest art nerd. We go to art museums and stuff. It's the funniest thing. It's the one place we go that he doesn't get recognized. But there's a whole layer to him that people don't see. But but he changed my whole life. So, it's I've been very, very lucky. In 15 years, I think I've been screwed over twice by people. And I mean, so many people have been so good to me. You know, I I don't know if you ever seen The Wire,
Yep.
right? So I managed truck drivers and warehouses my whole life. Season 2 of The Wire, I think, is my favorite television episode of anything, and I love the character of Frank Zabaka. Chris Bauer just wrote the forward to my last book. Like he's a big wrestling fan. He played Wild Bill on Heels, right?
Yeah.
Loves my work. Like, and he was like, I mean, to me, like he was my favorite character on my favorite show. And that guy just wrote a forward to my book. Like, I mean,
That's
it's,
awesome.
you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff is worth every bit of everything I've ever had to go through. Like if it all ended tomorrow, right? Like I had an incredible run of doing stuff and making stuff and whatever. But you know, I signed a contract to do the biggest project I'm ever going to do this year. I can't announce it yet, but I'll be announcing it later this year. And then I've got the other series that's coming out through a publisher. Should be doing volume 4 of Tales from the Road. I'm working on volume 5 for Headlocked, and we're doing this Gangrel. We did a 6-page story with Gangrel in volume 1 of Tales from the Road about a guy that trains Bigfoot to wrestle, and we're making that a series. It's set in Portland in the mid '80s. We get Bigfoot hooked on coke. It's pretty messed up.
Now, this is the same Bigfoot that was with the $6 million man, or this is a different Bigfoot?
This might be a separate Bigfoot.
Okay.
But yeah, so everybody thinks it's a gimmick. You know, it's a family-owned promotion that's going out of business due to like the national expansion. And, you know, they find Bigfoot and they use him to save the wrestling promotion. Instead of saying trading him for billions of dollars, they just, you know, teach him how to wrestle. And, you know, it's the 80s, so it gets nuts.
That's awesome.
So we open the story with Bigfoot in rehab doing yoga. So so that'll be our next Kickstarter. That should be up sometime. Sometime I'm hoping in April. I'm trying to get it ready for Mania, but I just finished mailing the last packages out for Tales from the Road Volume 3. So this will be my biggest year yet. I've got a ton of projects, and I've got a bunch of other things that I'm working on top of that. So I never stop moving. I never get a chance to stop moving. So, but
that's awesome.
Been, you know, making comics has been the great joy of my life. And I do panels at shows, you know, trying to, you know, encourage people to break in and, you know, to not worry about paths and stuff and just make your art and use your wacky voice and not worried about trying to be commercial or whatever. Just tell your weird stories. Cause you know, there's a story inside everyone that only you can tell. And I think that's you know, I think everybody should get a chance to tell that story. You know, some
Absolutely.
people have more than that, but you know, everybody I think has got at least one good story in.
Are you going to be at Ithacon?
I don't know, when is that? I'm not booked for it.
It's in April.
No,
April
20th. I'm in C2E2 that weekend.
Okay.
So,
and I think there's going to be a comic book show in White Plains in June.
Well, I'm after June 1st. I'm going to try to take a couple of months off because I got to work on this big project, my big secret project, and I'm going to try to write. But I mean, if I can do something I can drive to, that might be.
It's not the country. It's not the country. It's not far.
Fine. I mean, I just drove.
It's not upstate, you know.
So, I mean, sometimes those little shows, I mean, they're smaller shows. I don't want to say little because I don't know how big it is, but I mean, the smaller shows are better for me. Because, you know, if I'm at a show with 100 wrestlers, like I'm going to be at WrestleCon with Danhausen and Powerhouse Hobbs, and, you know, everybody wants to meet those people, and you can always buy my stuff later online. So, you know, I do shows like that for networking mostly, but
yeah,
I mean, you know, so sometimes if at a show I'm the only wrestling thing there, you know, do real well. So.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for your time. This has been awesome because I could probably talk to you like for another hour or so about wrestling and stuff. Because
let's save it for the sequel.
Hell yeah, yeah. We would love to talk to you again. I know Oren would too, picking your brain about wrestling and comics. And you know, we'd love to have you back when your next set of work comes out.
Yeah, I'm trying to do like a little relaunch thing coming out for San Diego. So.
Okay.
It's tricky because, like I said, I'm nobody's priority. So I'm on everybody else's time. And I have a million things. I have people that have, you know, super, super famous people that have agreed to do stuff and whatever, but it's all kind of when they want to do it.
Right.
And I have my own projects that don't involve other people that I try to work on in the meantime. And then, you know, sometimes, you know, we had a snowstorm last weekend and I managed truck drivers. So like, my whole weekend got chewed up dealing with that. So it's you know, I do what I can when I can, you know, but I'm always working. So
you need some sleep.
Nah.
It's all good. And we're back. So, what did you guys think of that interview? Mike is one hardworking guy. He does all this work traveling to conventions, constantly meeting other fans, wrestlers, comic book people in the industry. And this is not his full time job. He manages a fleet of trucks, and he does all this stuff in his spare time. So, I mean, look, you got to respect this man's hard work. He's built up this series on his own, spreading the word by himself, and he's doing an absolutely fantastic job. I encourage everyone to go check out headlockedcomic.com. Check out his work, check out the art. He has some great artists contributing as well as, all the wrestlers that contribute stories to his series. So it's been a great time talking to him. Until the next episode, please rate, review, subscribe, tell everyone. Please share our podcast with anyone you know who loves comics. Rate, review, subscribe. I think I said that already. I'll say it again. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And we'll see you next week.